March 3rd, 1944. Somewhere over the North Sea. The sky is a pale, washed-out grey, the horizon smeared with the last traces of morning fog. A lone aircraft streaks eastward at impossible speed, its twin Merlin engines screaming in harmony. The German radar stations along the Dutch coast scramble to make sense of the blip racing across their scopes. At first they assume it's a malfunction, perhaps a calibration error. Nothing the British fly moves that fast. But then the blip splits into 2, then 3, then 5. A formation. All heading inland. All far faster than expected. At Jagdgeschwader 1's forward airbase, near Deelen, Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Bernburg tosses aside his half-finished coffee as the red alert siren wails. Ground crews sprint across the flight line, pulling chocks, priming engines. Bernburg climbs into his Messerschmitt Bf 109G6 and slams the canopy shut. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Control to all fighters, the radio crackles. Fast-moving targets approaching from the west, unknown type. Intercept immediately. Unknown type. That phrase sets Bernburg on edge. The RAF is familiar. The Spitfire, the Mustang, the Lightning, but unknown. That's something else entirely. He guns the throttle. The 109 leaps forward, shaking itself like a dog waking from sleep. Behind him, the rest of the Staffel claws for altitude. The Luftwaffe has launched 200 fighters across Western Europe that day. And yet, in the hours to come, not a single one will successfully bring down the mysterious aircraft the British have unleashed. Not one. Inside a vast hangar that still smells of fresh sawdust and varnish, the most unlikely advanced bomber of the Second World War sits on its landing gear like a carved hunting bird, sleek, narrow fuselage, long wings, smooth curves, not a rivet in sight. It looks like it belongs to another century. This is the de Havilland Mosquito, the airplane RAF brass, once mocked as a wooden toy. A plane so light it can be lifted by half a dozen men. A plane built not from steel nor aluminum but from spruce, plywood and balsa. A plane that critics once claimed would dissolve in a rainstorm. And yet, here it stands. Chief Test Pilot Jeffrey de Havilland Jr. inspects her with a grin. At 27 years old, hair slicked back and flight jacket open, he looks more like a film actor than the man about to fly the fastest operational aircraft in Europe. "You're sure the Germans won't believe this?" he jokes to engineer Ronald Bishop. "They still don't believe it." Bishop replies, "Which is the whole point. Because the Mosquito isn't meant to look menacing. It's meant to outrun menace. No heavy guns, no armor plates, no defensive turrets, just speed, range, and agility unmatched by anything the Luftwaffe can field. Where a B-17 relies on 10 machine guns and a squadron escort to survive, the Mosquito relies purely on one thing. You can't kill what you can't catch." General Josef Kammhuber flips through reconnaissance reports with growing irritation. The Mosquito has been making daring daylight raids across occupied Europe for months, striking Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, bombing broadcasting stations in Berlin during Goering's speeches, photographing U-boat pens from impossible altitudes. But something about March 1944 alarms him. Reports from Western France, Belgium, and Holland all mention the same thing: aircraft type unknown, too fast for interception. Too fast. Kammhuber rubs his temples. The Luftwaffe's radar systems are advanced. Its night fighters deadly, its pilots still among the best trained in the world. But this new menace is upsetting every assumption. One report estimates the aircraft's speed at 400 mph. Another claims 420. Impossible. That would make it faster than any operational German fighter. Faster even than the prototype Me-209 that set a world record. Goering himself is furious. "They're made of wood," he had shouted days earlier. "Our fighters cannot catch wooden airplanes." His rage is not entirely unjustified. Germany has spent fortunes on metal, aluminum, duralumin, steel, and yet The British have outpaced them with plywood and carpenters, but the worst is yet to come. Bernburg levels off at 15,000 feet. The radio is a frenzy of overlapping voices. Control, this is Adler 4. We have visual contact. They're too fast. Closing, damn it, I can't hold them. Bernburg scans the sky. At first nothing. Then flashes of silver streaking across the clouds, impossibly sleek, impossibly graceful. The mosquitoes. 24 of them flying in flawless formation, sun glinting off their smooth plywood skins like polished bone. Bernburg pushes his throttle forward until it clicks. Emergency power. His 109 surges, but the mosquitoes do not care. They do not react. They simply keep going. The distance between hunter and hunted widening with every second. Adler 7. Do not pursue. They're baiting. But Bernburg ignores the warning. He dives, slightly, gaining speed. The airflow screaming against his canopy. At 360 mph, his aircraft shudders. At 380 mph, his control surfaces stiffen. At 400 mph, he feels the stick turn to stone. The mosquito ahead of him banks gently to the left, not evasively, but casually, almost mockingly, and then accelerates in a long, graceful arc. He watches it pull away, not being outflown, outclassed. Just weeks before this encounter, the mosquito had already stunned the world. On February 18, 1944, a squadron of them flew at rooftop height into occupied France and blew a hole in the walls of Amiens prison to free resistance captives. The mosquito pilots dropped their loads with surgical precision, something no other bomber in the world could have achieved. The operation shocked the Luftwaffe, not because it succeeded, but because the Germans couldn't react in time. The mosquitoes were simply too fast. By the time the alarm sounded, they were already gone. Goering had ranted for an hour after the raid. The British have the nerve to send in a bunch of plywood bombers, and we cannot stop them. It makes me furious. But what happened on March the 3rd was worse. Much worse. That day, more mosquitoes flew missions across Europe, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups, than ever before. A mix of reconnaissance, bombing, and decoy operations. They flew over France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany in an almost constant stream. The Luftwaffe deployed 3,200 fighters to intercept them. None succeeded. Not a single mosquito was shot down by enemy fighters that day. Back in England, a young engineer named John E. Walker stands beside a mosquito with a clipboard in hand. He watches armorers load 500-pound bombs into the belly bay as maintenance crews wipe oil from the engine nacelles. Hard to believe this works, a mechanic jokes. Walker shakes his head. It doesn't just work, it changes everything. Because the mosquito represents a radical rejection of air warfare orthodoxy. Most nations believe a bomber must be armored, armed, and escorted by fighters, but armor adds weight, guns add drag, more crew means more complexity. The mosquito strips all of that away. 2 seats, 2 engines, no guns, no armor. It is not a battle tank of the sky. It is a rapier. Where a B-17 climbs slowly, the mosquito rises like a homesick angel. Where a Lancaster lumbers, the mosquito dances. Where a Stuka shrieks downward in terror, the mosquito streaks forward in serene silence. Lightweight, aerodynamic, elegant, the perfect predator for a modern battlefield. And it exists because Britain had something Germany lacked at this stage of the war: abundant wood. The aircraft industry, already stretched thin, supplying Hurricanes and Spitfires, could not spare aluminum. So de Havilland turned to plywood, balsa, and resin adhesives, materials Britain could produce in enormous quantities. Cabinet makers, piano builders, and furniture craftsmen were hired to build aircraft. Factories that once made violins, chairs, and cabinets now produced wings. It was the war's strangest industrial miracle, and perhaps its most decisive. Bernburg is still chasing the mosquito, though even he knows the pursuit is pointless. His wingman, Feldwebel Dieter Jäger, pulls alongside. "Break off, Karl," Jäger calls over radio. We're not gaining." "I know," Bernburg mutters. He knows because his engines are overheating. He knows because he's now over enemy territory, deep into the Netherlands, with fuel he cannot afford to waste. And he knows because the Mosquito pilot, aware of the 109's limited range, has subtly shifted course toward the open North Sea. If Bernburg follows further, he may not make it home. With a curse, he banks right and breaks off. Jaeger follows reluctantly. As they climb, the mosquitoes vanish into the hazy blue ahead, not into cloud, not into weather, just into speed. They're ghosts, Jaeger says bitterly. Bernburg doesn't respond. He agrees. In Berlin, the failures pile up. Every hour brings new reports. Mosquitoes overhead Ruhr region. Mosquito sighted near Hamburg, too high for interception. Mosquito bombed Amsterdam radio station, evaded all fighters. Some German generals start referring to the aircraft as der hölzerne Spuk, the wooden apparition. The propaganda ministry bans the phrase. Goering no longer laughs at the mosquito. He fears it, not because of its bombs, which are precise but relatively small, but because of what it represents. A bomber Germany cannot stop. For a regime obsessed with technological superiority, the humiliation is unbearable. The Mosquito squadrons return one by one, engines humming as they taxi along the runway. The crews climb out, exhausted but alive. Group Captain Adrian Morshead stands at the dispersal hut door, arms crossed, watching them arrive. "All back?" he asks the operations officer. "All accounted for, sir." A slow smile spreads across Morshead's face. 3,200 Luftwaffe fighters deployed, 0 mosquitoes, lost to enemy aircraft. He walks out onto the tarmac, running a hand along the smooth wooden skin of a returning fighter bomber. "It works," he whispers. "It bloody works." That night, Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Bernburg sits on his bunk, still in his flight gear, and writes to his sister in Bremen. "Today, we chased wooden aircraft across the sky. They outran us like we were standing still. I have never seen anything like it. We train, we fight, we risk everything, and they simply fly away. If this is the future, I fear for all of us." He sets the letter aside and exhales. Tomorrow will be the same. More alerts, more pursuits, more failure, wood and glue, defeating steel and fire. He cannot understand it. Yet the reality is undeniable. As the lamps dim at RAF bases and Luftwaffe airfields alike, one truth echoes across Europe. The age of the wooden bomber has arrived. A bomber that flies faster than fighters. A bomber invisible to interception. A bomber that proves elegance can triumph over brute force. In the British press, civilians begin calling it the Wooden Wonder. Luftwaffe pilots whisper a different name, Der Geist, the ghost. But the story of March 3rd, 1944 is only the beginning. In the chapters that follow, the Mosquito will not merely evade death, it will humiliate, outthink, and outmaneuver one of the most formidable air forces in history. Because the real genius of the Mosquito isn't just its speed, it's what that speed makes possible. March 5th, 1944, 2 days after the Great Chase, a thin mist clings to the hedgerows of Cambridgeshire as dawn creeps across RAF Hunsdon. The chill cuts straight through wool and leather, but the air crews assembling near the dispersal huts stand alert, steaming breath, hanging in the morning haze. The men of No. 21 Squadron and No. 464 Squadron, RAAF, know something unusual is coming. A low murmur travels across the airfield, speculation, hunches, gallows humor. Pilots grip tin mugs of scalding tea, navigators and bombardiers go over maps one more time, though the details are still sealed. At 0600 sharp, Group Captain Charles Pickard strides out of Operations HQ. Thin, hawk-featured, pipe clamped between his teeth, Pickard carries the aura of a man who has already outlived his odds. His presence alone quiets the field. "Gentlemen," he calls out, "you've embarrassed the Luftwaffe once. Today, you'll make them furious." A few tired smiles break across grim faces. He continues, "The Germans believe you're ghosts. Today, you'll convince them." Behind him, on the taxiways, 24 Mosquitoes sit ready. Engines pre-warmed, bomb bays open. loaded with 500 Plauberti bombs and 4x28 mm Hispano cannons. They look elegant, but deadly. Grey wooden skin, black spinners, slender wings, aircraft that shouldn't exist yet now terrify the German high command. A hush falls as Picard unfurls the target map. Aarhus University, Denmark, commandeered by the Gestapo. Inside its basement, Danish resistance members are being tortured. Documents crucial to the movement are stored in reinforced vaults. The objective: breach the building precisely, destroy Gestapo archives, eliminate interrogators, avoid civilian casualties, and avoid damage to the nearby hospital. The entire raid must be done with precision measured in meters, not miles. A Lance or Halifax would flatten the entire district. A Mustang or Spitfire can't carry the required ordnance. A B-24 is too slow and too visible, but a Mosquito, it can fly at rooftop height, drop a bomb through a specific window, and vanish before German fighters even scramble. This is why the Mosquito exists. Picard outlines the plan. Low level, very low. You'll fly beneath their radar, skim the sea, and hit the university courtyard from under 100 feet. Time on target, 11 unquock. Hit fast, hit clean, and get out. The room stays silent. Not out of fear, out of focus. They've seen the recon photos. They know what's at stake. When Picard finishes, there's only one question from a young navigator with a faint Australian accent. What about fighter opposition, sir? Picard doesn't sugarcoat it. You won't outrun everything, but you'll outrun most of it. At this very moment, 400 miles to the east, Lieutenant Martin Vennekamp walks the perimeter of Aalborg West Airfield. His Bf 109G6 sits, freshly serviced, yellow theater markings gleaming in the weak sun. He hasn't slept well. None of them have. 2 days earlier, he watched mosquitoes streak overhead like silver arrows, while his entire staffel failed to catch a single one. He still hears the embarrassment in his commander's voice. They fly wooden planes faster than ours? How is this possible? Wennekamp isn't arrogant like some. He respects an enemy when it deserves respect. Today, he expects a routine patrol. What's coming for them is anything but routine. 10:02 local time. The North Sea. Picard leads the first wave. His navigator checks the stopwatch. Every aircraft is timed to the second. The Mosquitoes fly 30 feet above the waves, their wingtips nearly kissing whitecaps. Salt spray streaks their windscreens. The airframe trembles under the strain of low-altitude turbulence. But the pilots of 21 Squadron are used to it. They train for this. Their lives depend on it. Inside the cockpit, engine RPM fills every thought. Pilots adjust throttle constantly. One mistake, and the aircraft will dip enough to take a wave through its belly. The crews speak little. They save breath, save oxygen, save concentration. Ahead, the coast of Denmark grows from a thin line to a pale smear of sand. At Skagen radar station, an operator leans over a CRT screen. The sweep passes again. A faint distortion flickers at the bottom of the range. Probably sea clutter, he thinks. Waves, fishing vessels, maybe seabirds. Mosquitoes flying this low are nearly impossible to detect. The radar officer scribbles a note but doesn't sound an alarm. He misses the one fleeting clue that his country is minutes away from disaster. 10:58. Aarhus. Students and civilians on the university's grounds hear a long, distant rumble like a summer storm rolling in. Moments later, the storm arrives. Picard's Mosquito clears the tree line at 200 miles, barely 60 feet above the ground. His bomb aimer peers through the marked 14 bomb site. Stand by. The courtyard appears. The main Gestapo building rises ahead, red brick iron window frames, sandbagged entrances. Steady. Steady. Bomb doors open. Two 500 Poltely bombs drop cleanly and strike the west wing with surgical precision. The explosion throws masonry skyward. Second and third Mosquitoes follow, each delivering bombs through specific windows, shattering interrogation rooms and blowing apart filing cabinets stuffed with documents identifying resistance members. Civilians flee across the courtyard in panic, but the pilots hold fire. They maintain strict discipline. This is not terror bombing. This is scalpel work. Within seconds, the entire courtyard is engulfed in smoke and dust. The initial explosions send shockwaves across Aarhus. From the rooftop of the Gestapo headquarters, officers scramble for machine guns. 2 German soldiers on the roof try to track the mosquitoes with MG-34s, but the aircraft move too fast, too low, too unpredictable. From one window, a Gestapo major shouts orders, "Get Alborg, interceptors, schnell." But by the time the message reaches the airfield, the mosquitoes are already turning away. Wennekamp hears shouting before he reaches his fighter. "University hit, low-level raid, multiple bombers, type unknown." He doesn't need to hear the rest. He knows exactly what type they are. Mosquitoes. The mechanics pull the starter cart away. Oil pressure surges. The Daimler-Benz engine roars to life. "Tower to all fighters. Mosquitoes inbound from south. Vector 90. Intercept." The 109s lift off in pairs. As Wennekamp climbs, he spots them, small shapes in the distance, turning, climbing slightly, already leaving hell behind them. He pushes throttle forward until the engine threatens to overheat. The chase begins. Inside Pickard's aircraft, the navigator glances back. "Bandits climbing behind us. 2 o'clock low." Pickard doesn't panic. He knows what this aircraft can do. The Mosquito, despite being a bomber, has the agility of a fighter. Its broad wings and lightweight frame give it an astonishing turning radius. Not Spitfire level, but close enough. Pickard banks sharply left. The Mosquito carves through the air like a knife, wings slicing the thin cloud layer. Behind them, Wennekamp curses aloud. "They turn like fighters." He pushes his 109 harder, staying inside stall margins. But he loses altitude, loses speed. The Mosquitoes, in contrast, maintain both. The gap widens. They're pulling away. Not all Mosquitoes flee. A pair from 464 Squadron slows deliberately, forming a rear guard. Their cannons are loaded with 20mm shells designed to shred metal aircraft. Wennekamp finds himself closing not on fleeing prey, but on predators. One Mosquito banks toward him with predatory precision. The pilot dives slightly to gain speed, then rolls in. Wennekamp yanks the stick, tracers streak past his canopy. The Mosquito fires a 2-second burst. A 109 in Wennekamp's formation bursts into flame and spirals downward. "Mein Gott," he whispers, "they're attacking us." While fighters engage the rear guard, a second wave of Mosquitoes arrives over Aarhus. Their mission? Destroy the remaining wings of the complex and collapse the basement archives. Civilians in the hospital nearby huddle under beds as the wooden bombers roar overhead at rooftop height. Bomb aimer after bomb aimer calls targets. The second wave's explosives detonate with terrifying reliability, blasting open vaults, shredding interrogation rooms, and collapsing the interior structure of the Gestapo command center. In less than 4 minutes, the building is a ruin. Gestapo radio operators inside shout unintelligible messages before dust and debris choke their transmissions. By 11:05, the strike is complete. Pickard's remaining aircraft regroup. One Mosquito limps slightly. Flak damage in the wing, nothing fatal. Another's radiator is leaking steam, but all are still airborne. "Course 295, full power," Pickard orders. "Let's go home." The Mosquitoes accelerate. The sky behind them fills with angry Messerschmitts, but they cannot close the distance. Wennekamp watches helplessly as the wooden bombers slip further and further away. "They're untouchable," he whispers. But the Luftwaffe will not give up easily. As the Mosquitoes exit Denmark, a fresh grupper of F-190s approaches head-on. Heavier armament, more firepower. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. They open fire at long range. Pickard reacts instantly. "Break!" The formation scatters. Mosquitoes twist like eels in sunlight. Their speed bleeds off in tight turns, but returns instantly as they level out. The FW-190s manage a few hits, a punctured fuel tank, a damaged rudder, but not a single kill. These wooden aircraft, light and flexible, seem to shrug off glancing blows that would cripple a metal bomber. One FW-190 overcommits in a high-speed dive. A Mosquito gunship turns into him and fires. Its 4 Hispano cannons rip through the fighter's fuselage. The 190 disintegrates mid-roll, Another falls victim seconds later. The German commander orders disengagement. This is madness. They are too fast. And so the German pursuit ends, not with a victory, but a retreat. Hours later, Danish resistance members approach the smouldering campus cautiously. Fires crackle. The air smells of burnt paper and cordite. Inside, what remains of the basement, a resistance courier finds piles of charred files, names, addresses, operational details of dozens of underground cells. Destroyed. The Gestapo's archival nerve center has been obliterated. Prisoners who survived the blasts crawl from the rubble. Some weep, some cheer. Some don't understand what has happened, but all know the same truth. The wooden bombers came for us. Venekamp's Staffel limps back to base. 2 aircraft missing, 1 badly damaged. No mosquitoes, shot down. The base commander waits with a look of restrained fury. How? He demands. How do wooden aircraft evade 3 Gruppen of fighters? No one has an answer, because the answer defies their worldview. When the Aarhus raid report arrives in Berlin, Hermann Goering erupts in volcanic rage. He slams the table. Papers scatter. I will not be mocked by plywood airplanes. His generals stay silent. One finally speaks. Mein Reichsmarschall, the Mosquito is the fastest bomber in the world. Goering's voice drops to a bitter whisper. I know. I've been told that every day. That evening, the Mosquitoes land triumphantly. Ground crews swarm them, checking damage, recording performance. Picard's navigator removes his headset, exhausted, but alive. We lost none, he says quietly. Picard nods. That, he replies, was worth everything. Within days, the Danish underground confirms total mission success. Archives destroyed. Interrogators killed, resistance members freed, 0 collateral casualties. At the hospital, everything executed with surgical precision. A mission impossible for any other aircraft in the world, but routine for a Mosquito. News of the raid spreads across occupied Europe. Whisper networks carry stories of aircraft that strike without warning and vanish before the Germans react. Some call them lightning bombers, the ghosts of England, the plywood phantoms. German pilots adopt a darker name, der Schattenjäger, the shadow hunter. These are not aircraft that merely outrun fighters. They humiliate them. As winter turns to spring in 1944, Germany faces a new reality. An enemy bomber that cannot be intercepted. A fighter bomber that can outmaneuver interceptors. A reconnaissance platform that photographs factories without detection. A radar that knocks out Gestapo headquarters with a surgeon's precision. The Mosquito doesn't just survive the war, it reshapes it. But its greatest test, the day it outruns 3,200 fighters, is still unfolding across occupied Europe because the ghost is no longer prey, it is hunter. June 12, 1942, Tokyo Arsenal proving ground. The rain had stopped only an hour earlier, but the soaked test field still shone under the pale sun like a sheet of hammered steel. Puddles reflected the skeletal towers around the proving ground, rust-streaked cranes, half-finished workshops, and rows of sandberms built as improvised bullet backstops. The air smelled of wet soil and gun oil. A group of senior engineers stood beneath a long canvas awning, notebooks tucked under their arms, steel-rimmed glasses fogged with humidity. At the front of the group, Chief Weapons Engineer Colonel Hideo Matsumura held one of the captured rifles in his hands. The American rifle, the one they still didn't fully understand. Matsumura turned it over one more time, marveling at the weight distribution, the fit of the wooden stock, and the surprising simplicity of the mechanism now that he had stripped it dozens of times. Behind him, Major Ichiro Nakata, the facility's ballistics expert, was scribbling calculations he hadn't calculated before 1942. Pressure curves, gas cycles, residual energy at lockup. Everything about this rifle had forced them to do something uncomfortable, rewrite their assumptions about what a battlefield rifle could be. A red flag rose above the range tower. 3 test shooters stepped forward, each wearing ear cotton and thick leather gloves. Before them lay 4 rifles on the bench, a standard Japanese Type 38 Arisaka, a newer Type 99, a captured Springfield 1903, and at the end, the weapon that had dominated every discussion for weeks, the M1 Garand. The shooters began with their own rifles. 8 slow shots from the Type 38. 9 steady rounds from the Type 99. The engineers didn't even bother writing down the observations. They'd seen this before. The long recoil, the bolt manipulation, the muzzle rise. Nothing surprising. Then they moved to the Springfield. Smooth, accurate, familiar. But the Garand, that was the one everyone unconsciously leaned forward for. The American rifleman raised it, braced his stance, and pulled the trigger. Bang, 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 ping. 8 shots. 2 seconds. A cloud of dust from the berm, still rising. The muzzle barely drifted. The shooter didn't pause, didn't shift his grip, didn't fumble for a bolt, didn't think. He simply transitioned back to low ready, eyes already on the next target. A murmur ran through the Japanese engineers, not because they hadn't heard rapid fire before, but because they'd never heard it from a weapon that wasn't a machine gun. Matsumura rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This," he said quietly, "is going to change the mathematics of infantry combat." Inside the main laboratory, chalk dust drifted through the warm air as balls of equations covered the blackboards. Rate of fire comparison, accurate aimed fire. Type 38, Arisaka, 10 to 12 rounds, min. Type 99, Arisaka, 12 to 15 rounds, min. Springfield, 1903, 10 to 15 rounds, min. M1, Garand, 40 to 50 rounds, min. The difference was obscene, not theoretical, not a best-case estimate, but observed, repeated, and verified under controlled conditions. Nakata stared at the numbers and finally said what they had been avoiding. If this is representative of American infantry, then each of their rifle squads produces the firepower of nearly 2 of ours. And, another engineer added reluctantly, their accuracy under rapid fire remains far higher. They do not lose their sight picture after each shot. The bolt does not interrupt their posture. "It's not a rifle," Matsumura murmured. "It's a force multiplier." They compared recoil energy. They measured gas pressures. They studied carbon buildup after extended firing. The conclusion became clearer with every test. The Garand allowed even an average soldier to shoot like a marksman and fire like a machine gunner. The engineers weren't the only ones watching. In a small observation booth above the laboratory floor, 2 intelligence officers from the Imperial Army headquarters reviewed the data with stern faces. "The Americans field this rifle widely?" one asked. "Yes." "Yes," replied Nakata. "From the Philippine front as well as from recovered reports from Bataan, it appears to be their new standard issue." The 2 officers exchanged a troubled look. A standard issue semi-automatic rifle for every soldier. Japan had desperately wanted to avoid that possibility. They had assumed the weapon was rare, limited, experimental. But the captured crates told another story. Hundreds of Garands, thousands of N-block clips, stacks of matching ammunition. This was not a prototype, not a special unit weapon. It was their baseline. The officer leaned forward. "Colonel Matsumura, if we continue fighting Americans in the Pacific, do we have an answer to this weapon?" There was a long silence. Finally, Matsumura bowed his head. "No, sir. Even if Japan stopped every other project, even if they poured all resources into forging a Japanese semi-automatic rifle, their industry simply could not tool up fast enough. Not by 943, not even by 1944. The cold truth settled like dust in the silent room. The Americans had fielded a weapon Japan could not realistically match. The more they studied the Garand, the more it revealed a deeper problem, something beyond metallurgy or machining tolerances. It exposed a flaw in Japan's entire infantry doctrine. For decades, the Imperial Army had emphasized bayonet fighting, long-range volley fire, Bushido spirit, lightness and durability over rate of fire. But the Pacific wasn't fought on open plains, like Manchuria. It was fought in dense jungles, ravines, coconut groves, coral ridges, broken volcanic terrain. Engagement ranges collapsed to 50 meters or less. In these close quarters, the Garan's advantages became overwhelming. 8 shots in 2 seconds meant suppressive fire before the Japanese soldier even got his second round chambered. And suppressive fire meant mobility. Mobility meant tactical initiative. And tactical initiative meant survival. The engineers exchanged anxious glances as they themselves walked through hypothetical firefights. One imagined a squad assaulting an American-held ridge. We would rush forward, and they would cut down 2 men before we covered 10 meters. And our return fire, too slow, too sporadic, too easily suppressed. And the psychological effect, devastating. They all knew it. Losing the exchange of fire typically meant losing the entire engagement. No amount of bayonet training or courage compensated for being outshot 3-1 before even reaching effective range. The Garand wasn't just a rifle, it was a battlefield philosophy made tangible. If there was one thing the Japanese engineers respected deeply, perhaps too much, it was craftsmanship. They prided themselves on elegant simplicity, on designs that were rugged, field-serviceable, and elegantly minimalist. But the Garand both contradicted and challenged their standards. It was rugged and sophisticated, simple to use, and complex internally, overbuilt, yet perfectly reliable. On a disassembly table, one of the younger engineers shook his head as he examined the milled receiver. "I do not understand," he said. "Why machine something so heavy? Why not stamp it?" "Because they can afford to," Matsumura replied. "They have steel mills that can produce alloys we cannot. They have machining factories that run on electrification far beyond ours." A bitter truth. American industry wasn't just bigger. It was operating in a different dimension. Their production capacity meant they could use more expensive machining techniques, use better steel compositions, allow tighter tolerances, and still mass-produce the weapon. Japan's firearms industry, in contrast, relied heavily on small workshops and limited industrial facilities. The Garand's receiver alone would have required new mills, new tooling, new heat treatment equipment, a multi-year effort, an impossible ask in the middle of a war. The engineers didn't like admitting this, but they could no longer deny it. Japan's bottleneck was not design, it was industry. 2 weeks later, they moved from the controlled proving ground to an improvised jungle course built to simulate New Guinea terrain, thick brush, uneven mud, low visibility. 3 squads of test soldiers ran mock contact drills, 1 squad equipped with Arisakas, 1 with mixed captured weapons, and 1 with Garands. The results were uncomfortable, even humiliating. The Garand-equipped squad, fired first in every engagement, achieved target suppression twice as fast, moved more confidently between cover, and reacted faster to shifting threats. Meanwhile, the Arisaka squads struggled to return meaningful fire quickly enough to keep pace with the exercise. After the 10th trial, the officer overseeing the drill finally approached Matsumura. "This is no longer a test of rifles," he said. "This is a test of morale, and your results show a collapse before the fight even starts." Matsumura knew he was right. It wasn't that Japanese soldiers were inferior. It was that they were tactically handcuffed from the moment an American patrol spotted them. The jungle course was supposed to show the engineers how to adapt. Instead, it had shown them how outmatched they were. July 2nd, 1942. Tokyo. The conference room was suffocatingly quiet. A line of senior officers sat behind a long lacquered table. On the opposite side, Matsumura and his engineering team waited, shoulders stiff, uniforms damp from the oppressive heat. "State your findings," one general ordered. Matsumura stepped forward. He did not bow as deeply as politeness required. Not out of disrespect, but because he knew what he was about to tit would be unpleasant. "Our analysis confirms," he began, "that the American M1 Garand rifle represents a substantial advancement in infantry armament. In close and medium-range engagements, it provides—" A general cut him off. "Superiority?" Matsumura swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Quantify it." He inhaled sharply. 3-1 in rate of fire. Nearly double in effective close-range lethality. Significantly higher suppressive capability. Near-instant follow-up shots. And, psychologically, He hesitated. It deprives our infantry of initiative. Before our soldiers can return fire, American riflemen can fire multiple accurate shots. This undermines morale, cohesion, and survivability. Silence. Absolute silence. Then another general leaned forward, tapping a calloused finger on the table. What would it take to build our own equivalent? Matsumura had prepared for this question. He had hoped not to be asked. At least 3 years, he said. Perhaps 4. And cost? Massive. We would have to convert several factories, redirect machining capacity, develop new metallurgy processes. The effort would be monumental. And if we do nothing? Matsumura looked him in the eyes, then spoke the deepest truth of the entire study. Then every encounter with American infantry will grow more costly, every assault more difficult, every defensive line more vulnerable. We will be fighting soldiers who can deliver more firepower, faster, with less effort. Our courage will not compensate for their fire. The room stayed silent for a long time. Then the highest-ranking officer, a man with frost-white hair and a face carved by decades of war, finally spoke. Colonel Matsumura, thank you. We will take your findings under advisement. The phrase was polite. It was also the kiss of death. The meeting was over. Matsumura knew what was coming. A memo circulated days later. Further research into American semi-automatic rifles will continue, but full-scale industrial development is not feasible at this time due to ongoing priority operations. A quiet burial, a reluctant surrender. In private, the engineering team gathered one last time in the workshop. The Garand disassembled on the bench in front of them. They had learned much, how the gas port self-regulated, how the timing avoided premature unlocking, how the en-bloc clip simplified logistics, how machining tolerances achieved reliability. Japan could not match at scale. But they also understood something painful. Even if Japan built a perfect copy, it wouldn't matter. Not soon enough, not in enough numbers, not with enough ammunition. The Americans had solved a problem before Japan even understood it was a problem. A superpower had engineered a rifle suitable for a superpower's industry. By the end of July, activity at the proving ground returned to normal. Tests continued. Rifles were cleaned, reorganized, and quietly stored away. But Matsumura could not forget what he had seen. He knew, though he couldn't say it aloud, that the Garand hinted at something deeper than a technological shift. It hinted at the direction the war was moving, toward industrial warfare, toward mechanized mass production, toward nations who could field advanced weapons not as luxuries, but as standards. Japan was brave, Japan was disciplined, Japan was committed, but the Americans had built a rifle that embodied an uncomfortable truth. The war would be decided not just by courage, but by capability, not just by spirit, but by steel. And the Garand lying silent on the table was a glimpse of an enemy Japan was not prepared to face. It wasn't just a rifle, it was the opening shot of a new era, and Japan, despite all its skill and dedication, was already behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.